They said she died in the stars. Then the human walked her home. The battlefield lay silent under the twin moons, their pale light illuminating the aftermath of carnage. Broken weapons, scattered armor, and the soft moans of the wounded painted a grim portrait of what had once been the verdant plains of Usumir. Among the fallen stood Master Whisper, his azure skin ashen with fatigue, his silver-threaded robe stained with blood not his own. His eyes, normally vibrant and keen, had dimmed to nearly colorless orbs as they searched the field desperately. "Niam," he called, his voice cracking with emotion rarely displayed before his council. "Guardian Niam." No answer came but the soft rustling of the night wind through the tall grasses. Master Whisper moved with growing desperation, turning over bodies, seeking any sign of emerald skin among the fallen. When he finally found what he sought, his breath caught painfully in his chest. There, half-buried beneath a fallen enemy soldier, lay a crystal pendant, the mark of the royal guardian. The emerald at its center, usually gleaming with inner light that matched Niam's skin, was now dull and cracked. Dried blood crusted its delicate silver setting. Master Whisper fell to his knees, clutching the pendant to his chest. Niam had been more than his finest guardian. She had been like a daughter to him since he'd found her as an abandoned child in the crystal spires. He had raised her, trained her, watched her grow into the fiercest protector the kingdom had ever known. And now she was gone. "Elder Whisper," a soft voice called. One of the surviving warriors approached cautiously. "We must return to the city. The Shade Walkers may return." Master Whisper nodded distantly, his grief a physical weight upon his hunched shoulders. He carefully placed the pendant in an inner pocket of his robes, close to his heart. "She led the charge," the warrior continued, attempting to offer comfort. "When the Shade Walkers broke through our eastern flank, she rallied the Guardians and drove them back. Without her sacrifice, we would all be lost." Master Whisper rose slowly, suddenly looking every one of his 800 years. "Sound the retreat," he commanded, his voice hollow. "Gather the wounded, we return to Crystales." As the survivors began their solemn march home, none noticed the faint trail of emerald blood leading away from the battlefield, into the darkness of the Whisperwood Forest, a place no Crystalian ever ventured, for it marked the boundary between their world and that of the humans. Pain was Niam's first conscious sensation, a searing, throbbing agony that radiated from her side throughout her body. Her second sensation was confusion. She was lying on something soft, not the hard ground of the battlefield. And there was warmth, not the cold embrace of death she had expected when she felt the Shade Walker's blade pierce her armor. She forced her eyes open, her vision blurry and unfocused. A wooden ceiling came slowly into view, illuminated by soft firelight. Not the crystal architecture of Crystales, not the battlefield. Where was she? Niam tried to move and immediately regretted it as fresh pain tore through her. An involuntary groan escaped her lips. "Easy now," a voice said, a voice unlike any she had heard before. "That wound nearly took you from this world. You're not ready to move yet." With effort, Niam turned her head toward the voice. What she saw made her heart lurch with fear and anger. A human male sat beside the bed, his pink skin and round ears marking him clearly as her ancestral enemy. She instinctively reached for her crystal blade, but her scabbard was empty, her armor removed. "Looking for this?" the human asked, gesturing to her weapon hanging on the wall. "Beautiful craftsmanship, never seen anything like it." "Return it," Niam demanded, her voice weak but fierce. "Return it, and I may grant you a swift death, human." The man's eyebrows rose, and to Niam's surprise, he laughed. "Quite the gratitude from someone I've spent 3 days keeping alive." He leaned forward, and Niam noticed his eyes, an unusual amber color that seemed to catch the firelight. "My name is Farrell, and you're welcome, by the way." "I am Guardian Niam of the Crystal Spires," she replied coldly. "And I would rather have died honorably on the battlefield than be saved by a human." Farrell shrugged, unperturbed by her hostility. "Well, Guardian Niam of the Crystal Spires, you nearly got your wish. I found you half dead at the edge of the forest, dragged yourself quite a distance from that battle." Memories flashed through Niam's mind. The chaos of combat, the shade walkers swarming their position, the searing pain as a blade found the gap in her armor. She remembered the desperate crawl away from the battlefield, determined to die somewhere peaceful, somewhere the enemy couldn't desecrate her body. "Why did you help me?" she asked, suspicion edging her voice. Farrell stood and moved to a small hearth where a pot bubbled with something fragrant. "Is it so strange to help someone in need?" he asked, stirring the contents, "even if they have green skin and pointed ears." Niam watched him warily. Everything she had been taught about humans painted them as greedy, destructive creatures, enemies of her kind since the great sundering centuries ago. Humans had been banished from the magical realms for their betrayal, for their attempt to steal the power of the crystal heart. "Your kind would sooner kill mine than help," she said. Farrell ladled something from the pot into a wooden bowl. "Perhaps you don't know my kind as well as you think." He approached with the bowl, and Niam tensed. "It's just broth. You need to regain your strength." Reluctantly, Niam allowed him to help her sit up slightly, wincing at the pain. The broth was surprisingly good, rich with herbs she didn't recognize, but that soothed her throat and seemed to ease the pain in her side. "Where am I?" she asked after several cautious sips. "My home," Farrell replied. "In the Whisperwood, far enough from your battlefields that you should be safe here." "The Whisperwood," Niam's eyes widened. "But that's the forbidden border between our worlds?" "Yes." Farrell's expression was unreadable. "Few venture here from either side. It's why I chose it." Niam studied him more carefully. Farrell was tall for a human, with broad shoulders and strong hands roughened by work. His hair was a rich brown, tied back from his face, revealing a scar that ran from his right temple to his jaw. He wore simple clothes, a wool tunic and leather breeches, but moved with a grace that spoke of training. "You're no ordinary human," she observed. A smile touched Farrell's lips. "And you're no ordinary," he hesitated. "What do you call yourselves, Crystalians?" "The Crystallis are my people," she confirmed. "Children of the Crystal Heart." "Well, guardian Niam of the Crystallis," Farrell said, taking the empty bowl, "you should rest. That wound was deep and your blood is different. I've done what I can, but healing will take time." As if his words had summoned her exhaustion back, Niam felt weariness wash over her. Her eyelids grew heavy, and she fought to keep them open. "The battle," she murmured. "My people, Master Whisper." "They retreated to your city," Farrell said softly. "I watched from the forest edge. They think you dead, I suspect." The knowledge should have driven Niam to action, to ignore her wounds and return to her people immediately. Instead, a strange calm settled over her. Perhaps it was better this way, to be thought dead than to be known as saved by a human. As darkness claimed her once more, Niam's last conscious thought was of Master Whisper's face, imagining the grief that would line it when he received news of her fall. She would return to him, she promised herself. But first, she needed to understand why this human had saved her, and what he truly wanted. The fire crackled softly in the hearth as Farrell watched his unlikely guest slip back into healing sleep. Outside, the ancient trees of the Whisperwood whispered secrets to the night wind, secrets of boundaries crossed and fates intertwined in ways neither human nor Crystallis had foreseen. The morning light filtered through the wooden shutters of Farrell's cottage, casting dappled patterns across Niam's emerald skin. She awoke slowly, the pain in her side duller than before but still present, a constant reminder of her brush with death. For several moments, she simply lay there, taking in her surroundings with clearer eyes than the night before. The cottage was small but meticulously organized. Herbs hung from the ceiling beams, filling the air with earthy fragrances. Shelves lined the walls, holding books, jars of mysterious substances, and various tools whose purposes Niam could only guess at. A table sat beneath the window, covered with mortar and pestles, dried plants, and what appeared to be her armor, partially mended. With effort, Niam pushed herself to a sitting position. Her body protested, but she refused to show weakness, even with no one watching. She was a guardian of the crystal spires, trained to endure, to push beyond pain, to serve. The door opened, and Farrell entered carrying a bucket of water. He paused when he saw her sitting up. "You're awake," he said, surprise evident in his voice. And sitting up already, your kind heals differently than humans, I see. We are not fragile like your kind, Niam replied, though she knew her rapid healing had less to do with her Crystalli's physiology and more with the regenerative energy she had been trained to channel through her body. A skill few outside the Guardian Order possessed. Farrell set the bucket down and approached her bedside, his movements careful and deliberate as one might approach a wounded predator. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to her bandaged side. Niam hesitated. To allow a human to touch her went against everything she had been taught. But this human had already saved her life, had already touched her to bandage her wound. With a curt nod, she granted permission. His hands were gentle as he unwrapped the bandages. Niam watched his face, searching for signs of disgust or fascination at her alien physiology. But Farrell's expression remained professionally focused, his amber eyes evaluating the wound with practiced care. "The herbs are working," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "The infection is receding." He glanced up, meeting her gaze. "You're lucky. The blade was poisoned, a slow-acting toxin designed to ensure no survivors left the battlefield." "How did you know to treat it?" Niam asked. A shadow passed over Farrell's face. "I've seen its work before." Before she could question him further, he turned away to retrieve fresh bandages and a small pot of salve from a nearby shelf. "This will sting," he warned before applying the salve to her wound. Niam clenched her jaw against the burning sensation but made no sound. As Farrell worked, she studied him more closely. His movements were practiced, efficient, not those of a simple forest dweller. And there was something in the way he carried himself, a vigilance that reminded her of her fellow guardians. "You were a warrior," she stated rather than asked. Farrell's hands stilled for a moment before continuing their work. "A lifetime ago," he admitted quietly. "For which side?" Niam pressed. "Does it matter?" He secured the fresh bandage and stepped back. "That was another life. Here I'm just a healer now." Niam wanted to demand more answers, but exhaustion was already pulling at her again, the effort of sitting up draining what little strength she had recovered. Reluctantly, she eased back down onto the bed. "Rest," Farrell said, his voice softening. "I've prepared a broth with strengthening herbs. It will help your body fight the remaining poison." "I cannot stay long," Niam insisted. "My people." "Think you dead," Farrell reminded her gently, "and would likely kill me on sight if they found you here. Rest, Guardian. When you're strong enough to wield that crystal blade again, then we can discuss your return." The logic of his words was undeniable, though it frustrated her. With a sigh that sent a fresh wave of pain through her side, Niam closed her eyes. She heard Farrell move away, the sound of water being poured, the clinking of utensils. Days passed in a haze of sleep and waking, of broths and teas and quiet conversations. As Niam's strength gradually returned, she found herself watching Farrell as he went about his daily tasks. He foraged in the forest each morning, returning with plants she didn't recognize. He spent hours at his table, grinding, mixing, distilling. Sometimes he would disappear for longer periods, returning with game or, occasionally, supplies she suspected came from some human settlement beyond the forest. On the fifth day, Niam managed to stand and walk the short distance to the cottage door. The effort left her breathless and trembling, but the achievement filled her with determination. Outside, she discovered a small garden, and beyond it, a path leading down to a lake that gleamed like polished silver in the afternoon light. "The healing waters," Farrell's voice came from behind her. "That's what the old stories call it." Niam turned to find him watching her from where he knelt in the garden, soil darkening his hands. "Is it magical?" she asked, her gaze returning to the shimmering surface. "Perhaps," he replied, rising and dusting off his hands. "The boundary between our worlds is thin here. Things blend." He joined her at the threshold. "The water has properties I've never encountered elsewhere. It's part of why I settled here, why I can create the medicines I do. And why you could save me when my own healers might have failed," Niam realized aloud. Farrell nodded. "When you're stronger, bathing in it will help complete your healing." The thought of immersing herself in the lake sent a strange shiver through Niam, half apprehension, half longing. She had always been drawn to water, even as a child in the crystal towers where water was channeled through elaborate aqueducts. Master Whisper used to say she had been touched by the water spirits at birth, explaining her unusual affinity for flow-based combat styles. "Tell me about your people," Farrell said, interrupting her thoughts. "I've only seen crystallies from afar, the towers catching the sunlight. It must be beautiful." Niam hesitated. Sharing information about her homeland with a human went against her training. Yet this human had saved her life, had shown her nothing but kindness. And there was genuine curiosity in his question, not the calculating interest she might have expected. "It is," she admitted. "When the twin suns rise, the light refracts through the crystal spires in thousands of colors. The streets and buildings are built from the living crystal that grows from the heart at the center of the city." "The crystal heart," Farrell murmured, "the source of your magic." Niam nodded. "It has sustained our people since the Great Sundering when our worlds were separated." "And what does a guardian do exactly?" Farrell asked, genuine interest warming his expression. "We protect," Niam replied simply. "The borders, the heart, the people. We train from childhood in combat and crystal magic. The pendant I wore," she broke off, remembering its loss on the battlefield. Master Whisper would have found it, would believe her truly gone. "You lost something precious," Farrell observed softly. "My marking, the symbol of my oath and rank." Niam's hand went instinctively to her throat where the pendant should have hung. "It's how my people will know I fell." Silence settled between them, comfortable in a way Niam would never have imagined possible with a human. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the garden. "Come," Farrell said finally. "You should rest. Tomorrow, if you feel strong enough, we'll try the lake." The next morning dawned clear and warm. Niam woke feeling stronger than she had since before the battle. The pain in her side had faded to a dull ache, and when she examined the wound, she found new skin forming along its edges, emerald and healthy. Farrell had left fresh clothing for her, simple garments clearly modified to accommodate her taller frame. They were nothing like her guardian armor, but they were clean and surprisingly comfortable against her skin. Outside, she found Farrell waiting by the garden gate. "Ready?" he asked. Niam nodded, and together they made their way down the narrow path to the lake. Up close, the water was even more remarkable, clear as crystal near the shore, deepening to a blue so intense it almost hurt to look at directly. Ripples moved across its surface, though there was no wind, as if the lake itself breathed. "It's beautiful," Niam whispered. "And powerful," Farrell cautioned. "Don't go beyond where you can stand." He turned away discreetly as Niam removed her outer garments, leaving only the thin underclothes Farrell had provided. The water embraced her like a living thing, cool against her skin yet somehow warm at the same time. Niam waded deeper, feeling a tingling sensation wherever the water touched her wounded side. She closed her eyes, letting the sensation wash over her, through her. And then something unexpected, a voice, or perhaps not a voice so much as a feeling with words attached. "Guardian of crystal, child of light, what brings you to the boundary waters?" Niam's eyes flew open. "Did you hear that?" she called to Farrell, who watched from the shore. He tilted his head. "The lake speaks to you." "You know about this?" Farrell smiled slightly. "The lake communicates in its way. It's different for everyone. For me, it's more feelings than words." Niam turned her attention back to the water surrounding her. "I am healing," she thought toward the presence she felt. "A kind human saved me and brought me here." Human and crystallis, together at the boundary, the water seemed to murmur. An old pattern reforms, a cycle returns. Before Niam could question this cryptic response, a surge of energy flowed through the water and into her wound. She gasped as warmth spread throughout her body, radiating from her injury outward. The sensation was intense but not painful, like sunlight flooding through her veins. When it subsided, Niam looked down at her side. The wound had closed completely, leaving only a faint silvery line where the Shade Walker's blade had pierced her. "Farrell," she called out, amazement in her voice. "Look." He waded into the shallows, his expression shifting from concern to wonder as he saw her healed skin. "The waters have blessed you," he said softly. "They don't do that for everyone." Niam made her way back to shore, water streaming from her emerald skin. As she stepped onto dry land, she felt reborn, stronger than before, more alive. She flexed her arms, twisted her torso, feeling no pain, no limitation. "I'm healed," she said, disbelief coloring her voice. "Truly healed." Farrell nodded, a strange mix of emotions crossing his face. Happiness, relief, and something else Niam couldn't quite identify. "The lake has accepted you," he said, "as it did me long ago." "What does that mean?" Niam asked. Farrell looked out over the shimmering waters. "I'm not entirely sure," he admitted, "but those the lake heals are changed in ways that aren't always visible immediately." As they walked back to the cottage, Niam found herself studying Farrell with new eyes. This human who lived at the boundary between worlds, who understood the language of healing waters, who had saved an enemy without hesitation. He was unlike any human described in the teachings of her people. "Why did you really save me, Farrell?" she asked as they reached the garden gate. "The truth." Farrell stopped, turning to face her fully. The afternoon light caught in his amber eyes, making them glow like the crystal towers of her home at sunset. "Because I recognized in you something I lost long ago," he said simply. "A purpose, a sense of belonging." He glanced away, toward the distant tree line where the whisperwood grew darker and more ancient. "And because I'm tired of boundaries and ancient hatreds that no one remembers the reason for." Something shifted in Niam's understanding of the world, subtle yet profound, like the first crack in a dam that would eventually reshape the entire landscape. This human, this healer, had challenged everything she had been taught to believe about his kind. And as the twin suns began their descent toward the horizon, casting the cottage and garden in golden light, Niam realized that returning to Crystales would no longer be as simple as finding her way home. For she would be bringing with her questions and truths her people might not be ready to hear. The forest grew denser as Niam and Farrell ventured deeper into territories neither human nor Crystales had traveled in centuries. 3 days had passed since Niam's miraculous healing in the lake, and with each step away from Farrell's cottage, an unspoken understanding had formed between them. She needed to return home, and he had decided to guide her. "The direct path to Crystales is too dangerous," Farrell explained, as they navigated around massive tree roots that broke through the earth like ancient bones. "The Shade Walkers patrol the borderlands heavily since the battle." Niam nodded, her hand instinctively resting on her crystal blade, which Farrell had returned to her once she'd regained her strength. The weapon hummed faintly against her palm, responding to her energy. "Then where are we going?" "There's an old passage through the echoing caverns," Farrell replied, pushing aside a curtain of hanging vines. "It emerges near the western edge of your kingdom, far from where the battle took place." "How do you know of such paths?" Niam asked, the question that had lingered between them since they'd departed. Farrell paused, his back to her. For a moment, Niam thought he might evade the question as he had others about his past. Instead, he turned, amber eyes meeting her violet ones directly. "I wasn't always a healer," he said softly. "Before the lake found me, I was a scout for the human armies, one of those sent to map the boundaries, to find weaknesses in your defenses." Niam stiffened, her hand tightening on her weapon. "You were a spy." "I was a soldier following orders," he corrected gently, "until I wasn't." Before she could question him further, a sound cut through the forest silence, the snap of a branch underfoot, too heavy to be wildlife. Niam and Farrell froze in unison, bodies tensing in identical preparation for combat. "Shade Walkers," Farrell whispered, drawing a blade Niam hadn't seen before from his boot. 3, maybe 4. "How can you tell?" Niam whispered back, impressed despite herself. "The forest tells me." His eyes scanned the undergrowth. "This way, quickly." They moved silently through the trees, Farrell leading with the assured steps of one who knew every root and hollow. The sounds of pursuit grew fainter, but Niam could feel the predatory presence lingering at the edges of her awareness. The Shade Walkers weren't giving up, merely regrouping. As twilight descended, they reached a rocky outcropping that rose suddenly from the forest floor. Farrell led her to what appeared to be a solid rock face, then pressed his palm against a particular configuration of moss. To Niam's amazement, a section of stone slid aside, revealing a narrow passage. "Hidden pathways," she murmured. "You truly were a scout." "Among other things," Farrell replied cryptically, ushering her inside before sealing the entrance behind them. The passage was dark, but Niam's Crystalli's eyes adjusted quickly, perceiving shapes where human eyes would see only blackness. Still, Farrell moved with the confidence of familiarity, one hand trailing along the wall as if greeting an old friend. "There's a chamber ahead," he said. "We can rest there safely for the night." The chamber, when they reached it, opened like a breath in the mountain's lungs, a circular space with a high ceiling where crystal formations grew naturally from the rock, emitting a soft blue-green light that reminded Niam painfully of home. "These are like our crystal spires," she said with wonder, approaching one of the formations, "but wilder unrefined." "The magic bleeds through in places," Farrell explained, setting down his pack. "Boundaries are never as absolute as those who draw them wish they were." As they settled in for the night, sharing the simple provisions Farrell had packed, Niam found herself studying the human in the gentle crystal light. There was a grace to his movements, a quiet strength she had come to respect. "You never finished your story," she said finally, "about being a scout." Farrell sighed, leaning back against the chamber wall. "What do your people teach about the Great Sundering?" he asked instead of answering directly. Niam frowned at the apparent change of subject, but replied, "That humans sought to steal the power of the crystal heart for themselves, to dominate all beings. The heart defended itself, creating the boundary between our worlds." "And who taught you this history?" "Master Whisper," Niam said, "my guardian and mentor." Farrell nodded slowly. "For humans, the story is different. We're taught that your people hoarded the heart's power, denied its healing to our sick and dying. That when we asked for help during the Great Plague, your leaders turned us away." "That's not," Niam began, but stopped. How could she be certain? She had never questioned the history she'd been taught. "Both versions are probably half-truths," Farrell said gently, "shaped over centuries to justify continued separation." He reached into his pack and withdrew a small object wrapped in cloth. Carefully, he unwrapped it, revealing a crystal fragment that glowed with inner light, similar to the crystals in the chamber, but more refined, more purposeful. "This is why I stopped being a scout," he said, holding it out to her. "I found this near the battlefield of Silvermere after a skirmish between our peoples." Niam took the crystal hesitantly. The moment her fingers touched it, images flooded her mind, memories not her own. A human girl sick with fever, a Crystallis healer, hands glowing with power. Humans and Crystallis working together, living together. And then fear, misunderstanding, betrayal on both sides. She gasped, nearly dropping the crystal. "What is this?" "A memory stone," Farrell said. "One of the last artifacts from before the Sundering when our peoples lived in harmony. The lake showed me how to recognize it, how to read it." Niam stared at the crystal in her palm, her world tilting on its axis. "If this is true," she whispered, "everything I've been taught." "Not everything," Farrell corrected softly. "The heart is real, your duty to protect is real, but perhaps the enemy you've been fighting isn't who you thought." As if summoned by his words, a distant sound echoed through the caverns. The unmistakable rasp of Shade Walker breath, the scrape of their claws against stone. "They've found us," Niam said, leaping to her feet, crystal blade drawn in one fluid motion. Farrell was equally quick, his simple blade now gleaming with a pale light that hadn't been visible before. "There's another exit," he said urgently. "Behind the largest crystal formation, it leads deeper into the mountain." "We fight together," Niam insisted, surprising herself with the fierceness of her declaration. A smile flashed across Farrell's face, brief but genuine. "Together, then." The Shade Walkers burst into the chamber moments later, three twisted figures with gray skin and eyes like empty wells. They moved with unnatural speed, but Niam was faster, her crystal blade singing through the air as she engaged the first two attackers. From the corner of her eye, she saw Farrell face the third with skill that confirmed his warrior past. His blade moved with precision, finding the gaps in the creature's shadowy armor. They fought in perfect synchronization, covering each other's flanks as if they had trained together for years rather than just met. When the last Shade Walker fell, dissolving into ashen mist as all their kind did in death, Niam turned to Farrell with newfound respect. "You fight well for a healer," she said, a hint of teasing in her voice. "And you heal well for a warrior," he returned, gesturing to where she had instinctively channeled energy to a cut on his arm, a guardian technique she hadn't consciously chosen to share. Their eyes met, and something shifted between them, a boundary crossed that had nothing to do with kingdoms or ancient histories. "We should move," Farrell said finally, breaking the moment. "Where there are 3 Shade Walkers, more will follow." They gathered their belongings quickly and found the passage Farrell had mentioned, a narrow tunnel that twisted deeper into the mountain. As they navigated its winding path, Niam held the memory crystal tightly, its revelations echoing in her mind. "If our peoples once lived in harmony," she said as they walked, "what truly caused the sundering?" Farrell's expression grew somber in the faint light. "That's what I've been trying to discover. The memory stone shows fragments but not the whole. I believe," he hesitated, "I believe the Shade Walkers may hold the answer." "The Shade Walkers," Niam's brow furrowed, "they're mindless creatures of darkness." "Are they?" Farrell challenged. "Have you ever wondered why they attack both our peoples with equal hatred, why they seem to emerge strongest at the boundaries between our worlds?" Niam had never considered this. The Shade Walkers had always been simply the enemy, creatures to be fought and defeated to protect her people. "The ancient texts I've found suggest the Shade Walkers aren't natural beings," Farrell continued. "They were created, byproducts of the sundering itself, manifestations of the discord between our peoples." The tunnel widened suddenly, opening into another chamber, smaller than the first but filled with what appeared to be ancient carvings on the walls, figures of humans and crystales standing together beneath a great crystal formation. "This is," Niam touched the carvings with trembling fingers. "History," Farrell finished for her, "unfiltered by centuries of separation." As they studied the carvings together, shoulders nearly touching, Niam felt something unfamiliar bloom within her chest. A warmth, a connection that transcended the differences between their kinds. In this human, she had found not an enemy but a companion, perhaps even a friend. And as they continued their journey through the mountain passages, the path back to Crystales no longer seemed as straightforward as it once had. For Niam was beginning to understand that returning home would mean bringing not just herself, but also truths that might shake the very foundation of her world. And the emerald-skinned guardian was no longer certain which would be harder for her people to accept: the ancient history revealed by the memory crystal, or the human who had helped her discover it. The western approach to Crystales stood before them, gleaming towers catching the first light of dawn. After days of traveling through the mountain passages, emerging onto the verdant plains felt like stepping into another world. Niam stood motionless, drinking in the sight of home with eyes that now saw it differently. "It's even more beautiful than I imagined," Farrell murmured beside her. Niam glanced at him, nodding the wonder in his expression. "Few humans have seen Crystales from this vantage and lived to speak of it." "I understand why your people protect it so fiercely," he replied. They had grown closer during their journey, sharing stories, skills, and silences that spoke louder than words. The memory crystal had revealed more fragments each night, glimpses of a shared history that contradicted everything both their peoples believed. And somewhere along the winding mountain paths, admiration had blossomed into something deeper, though neither had given it voice. "What will you tell them?" Farrell asked, his eyes never leaving the crystal city. "The truth," Niam said, though uncertainty edged her voice. "About the Shade Walkers, about our shared history, about you." "They may not be ready to hear it." "Then I will make them ready." Determination hardened her features. "Master Whisper taught me that a guardian's duty is to protect the truth as fiercely as the kingdom." Farrell smiled, a hint of sadness in his eyes. I should remain here while you make your approach. A human at the gates might cause more chaos than revelation. Niam wanted to protest, but knew the wisdom in his caution. I'll return for you, she promised, by nightfall. Their gaze held for a moment longer than necessary before Niam turned toward her home, crystal blade at her side, and the memory stone warm against her chest, where she'd fashioned it into a new pendant. The city guards spotted her long before she reached the gates. By the time she arrived, a small contingent had formed to meet her, weapons drawn, faces twisted with disbelief and suspicion.